I still remember the sound that day. The faint click of my mouse, the hum of the ceiling fan, and then silence. My heart stopped when I saw the number on my screen. 0. $3 million. My life savings, gone. For a long minute, I just stared. My breath felt heavy, like the air had turned thick. Then slowly it sank in. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had taken it, and not a stranger. My ex-husband, and the woman he left me for, his lawyer. You know, betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slamming doors. Sometimes, it comes wrapped in polite emails and legal documents. It looks clean, professional, until it destroys you quietly. That day, I sat on the kitchen floor with my tea gone cold and wondered how a person rebuilds after losing everything. Money, trust, even faith. People think grief is loud, but it isn't. It's silent. It sits beside you when you eat alone, when you open your mail, when you pretend to be fine on the phone with your daughter. I thought my life was over. But destiny has strange ways of whispering hope. In an old box of my grandfather's letters, I found something. Just a faint pencil note, almost invisible. Account number 1719, Federal Trust, 1959. I didn't know then that those faded numbers would change everything. That an old man's forgotten savings would save not only my future, but also my faith in life itself. The night I realized I had lost $3 million, I remember how quiet the house was. The ticking of the wall clock felt louder than usual. My hands were shaking as I stared at the empty balance on the bank screen. It didn't feel real. My savings, my late husband's insurance, the house sale, all gone. The worst part? The man who took it wasn't a stranger. He was my ex-husband, Daniel. And beside him, smiling on social media just a week later, was his new lover, his lawyer. I still remember the way she looked at me the first time I met her. Cold, confident, and with that practiced smile that lawyers wear when they know they're smarter than you. Her name was Mia. She used to call me Mrs. Thompson, even after the divorce. I thought it was respect. Maybe it was mockery. My life before all this was simple. I used to run a small interior design studio from home. My clients were local families, people who wanted warmth more than luxury. Daniel and I had been together for 15 years before our marriage fell apart. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow distance, one excuse after another. Work, stress, silence. When he left, I didn't fight. We agreed to keep things civil. We divided the assets, or so I thought. I believed in fairness. I believed in him. That belief was my mistake. I see that clearly now. For a while, life was quiet after the divorce. I focused on my daughter, Lily, who was studying abroad. I paid her tuition on time, took comfort in her phone calls, her laughter. She always said, "Mom, you're stronger than you think." Maybe she saw the cracks before I did. Daniel was supposed to send me a portion of our joint investment returns every quarter. It was part of our agreement. I trusted him, and his lawyer, Mia, handled the paperwork. I signed where she told me. The statements came, neat and professional, showing steady growth. I never suspected anything. Until one morning, I logged in to pay property taxes and saw zeros. No balance. No notifications, nothing. My first call was to the bank. They told me the funds had been legally transferred months ago, authorized by signatures on file. My signatures, except they weren't mine. That was the first time in my life I felt completely powerless. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at the tiles. My tea had gone cold beside me. I didn't even cry. It was as if my mind refused to understand. $3 million. My future. Lily's education. My home. Gone. That night I lay awake, replaying every meeting, every word Daniel and Mia ever said. Somewhere in those polite exchanges, they had been planning this. When betrayal comes from love, it's quieter, more poisonous. You don't see it until it's already done. That was the beginning of my long fall. And strangely, also the beginning of something I never expected to find. My grandfather's forgotten legacy. But I didn't know that yet. Before the money vanished, I used to think of myself as a careful woman. I kept lists, saved receipts, made sure everything had its folder. I believed that order protected me. But now, as I searched through my papers, I realized how much trust I had placed in Daniel and Mia's words. The days after the loss felt like fog. I met with lawyers, but each consultation ended with the same cold advice. Without proof of forgery, there's little we can do. Mia had covered every trace. The signatures were nearly perfect. She knew my handwriting from the old documents. She must have practiced. Every night I went to bed with the same thought. How could they do this? Daniel, who once held my hand through our daughter's birth. Mia, who had once smiled at me like a sister. Friends told me to fight. But how? My savings were gone. My business barely covered rent now. I sold furniture piece by piece. I cut expenses. No more cafe mornings. No weekend movies. No flowers on the table. Even Lily noticed during our video calls. "Mom, you're eating alone again?" she asked one evening, her voice soft. I smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. Just tired. Don't worry about me." She hesitated. "Is it about Dad?" I lied. "No, everything's fine." I couldn't bear to tell her that the man she still called Dad had taken everything. One afternoon, I saw Daniel and Mia at a restaurant downtown. They didn't notice me. They looked happy. She touched his arm, laughed, and he leaned in close. My chest tightened, not from jealousy, but from disbelief. How do people sleep at night after doing what they did? I left before they saw me. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. That evening, I sat by my window, the sunset painting the walls orange, and made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't live like a victim. I would survive this, somehow. That's when I began going through old family documents, just to feel grounded. I opened boxes from my parents' attic, papers I hadn't touched in years, birth certificates, war photos, faded letters from my grandfather. He was a quiet man, a factory worker most of his life. I remembered sitting on his lap as a child, listening to his stories about saving every coin for the rainy day. That night, as I read one of his old letters, I noticed something strange. At the bottom, written faintly in pencil, was a line that read, "Account number 1719, Federal Trust, 1959, I frowned. I had never heard of that bank. Maybe it didn't exist anymore, or maybe it was just a note. Still, something about that number stayed in my mind. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of curiosity instead of despair. Maybe that was the start of my climb back up. The next morning, I decided to visit the Federal Trust branch downtown. It was an old building with marble floors and brass counters, the kind of place that smelled like paper and time. A young clerk greeted me politely. "I'm looking for an old account," I said. "From 1959. It belonged to my grandfather." He raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any documents?" I handed him the letter. He studied it, then disappeared into the back room. 15 minutes later, an older manager came out. "Mrs. Thompson, would you mind stepping into my office?" My heart began to race. Inside, he placed a thin folder on the table. "Dusty, but real." "It took a while," he said. "But yes, we do have a dormant account under your grandfather's name." I could barely speak. "Is there any balance left?" He smiled faintly. "More than you might expect. The account has been collecting interest for over 60 years. When he told me the number, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to change everything. Enough to start over. I walked out of that bank with trembling hands, holding papers that felt like a miracle. In that moment, I didn't think about revenge. I thought about peace, about dignity. Daniel and Mia had stolen what I had built, but my grandfather, without even knowing, had left me what I needed. It was as if life whispered, "You're not done yet." The next few days passed in quiet disbelief. I would wake up early, make tea, and spread the bank papers on my kitchen table, reading them again and again. The numbers felt unreal, like hope written in ink. I learned that my grandfather had opened that account after selling a small piece of land he owned. The money had stayed untouched for decades, quietly growing with interest. When he passed, no one knew about it. Not my mother, not my uncles, no one. Now, after 60 years, it had become enough to rebuild my life. But I didn't rush. After what Daniel and Mia had done, I wanted to move carefully this time. I took slow, small steps. I visited a financial advisor. Not a big firm, just a kind old man named Mr. Reynolds who worked from a modest office near the train station. I told him my story, from the betrayal to the forgotten account. He listened without interrupting. His eyes kind but sharp. When I finished, he said softly, "Mrs. Thompson, this account could be your second chance. But don't use it to fight them. Use it to free yourself." His words stayed with me. I realized that revenge would only keep me tied to Daniel and Mia. Freedom meant walking in a different direction. Quietly, wisely. Still, there was one thing I needed to do before I could move on completely. I needed to make sure what they did was recorded somewhere. Even if I didn't have the strength for a long court battle, I wanted the truth documented. So I began to gather evidence, slowly, carefully. Every old email, every transaction record, every document I had signed with Mia's firm. I placed them in clear folders, labeling each by date. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I just prepared. Sometimes at night, I would look through old photographs, me and Daniel in better days, our daughter as a child between us. We looked happy then. Maybe we were. Maybe people change in ways you can never predict. But as I looked at those pictures, I also realized something important. I had survived before Daniel came into my life, and I could survive after he left it. The next week, I visited the police department's fraud division. I met a young investigator named Clara. She listened quietly as I told her everything. When I handed her the forged signature papers, she nodded slowly. "These are very good copies," she said, "but there are microscopic differences. If you want, we can run a comparison test." I hesitated. "Will it be a public case?" "Not yet," she said. "Only an internal review." That was enough for me. I didn't want publicity. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my pain. Over the following weeks, Clara called me several times with updates. They confirmed what I already knew. The signatures were forged. Mia had altered them just slightly, enough to pass casual checks, but not professional scrutiny. I asked quietly, "Can they be punished?" Clara sighed. "Technically yes, but proving intent will take time. You'll need resources." I smiled faintly. "I have patience. That might be better than money." During this time, I decided to rebuild my life piece by piece. I reopened my small interior design business. Nothing grand, just a few local projects. The first client was an elderly couple who wanted to redesign their reading room. When I showed them the new plan, the wife smiled and said, "You make spaces feel like home." Her words made me tear up a little. It felt good to be useful again. Every time I walked into my studio, I felt a quiet pride. The walls still carried the smell of fresh paint. The shelves were simple, but they were mine. With the funds from my grandfather's account, I didn't buy luxury. I bought peace. I cleared my debts, paid Lily's tuition in full, and kept the rest invested safely. Sometimes, late at night, I would write letters to my grandfather in a small notebook I kept by the bed. I thanked him for saving me, for thinking ahead even when he had so little. It felt like he was still guiding me somehow. Months later, It has been 2 years since that afternoon when Daniel came to my door. Sometimes I still think of his face, the regret in his eyes, the way he kept touching his hands as if trying to wash something invisible off them. But those thoughts come softly now, like distant waves. They don't hurt anymore. Life after betrayal is not about forgetting. It's about learning how to live again without fear. I started rebuilding slowly. My design studio grew, one project at a time. The neighbors began recommending me. Soon I had more clients than I expected. Not the rich or famous, just ordinary people who wanted warmth in their homes. Each space I decorated felt like a small healing. I would walk around the rooms, touching fabrics, measuring light, choosing colors that felt calm, peaceful blues, gentle creams, the kind of colors that make people breathe easier. Sometimes I would look at a finished room and whisper to myself, "You did this. You started over." The money from my grandfather's account became my foundation, not my comfort. I used it wisely, keeping most of it invested safely. I didn't want luxury. I wanted stability. I even opened a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name, just a small one, for students studying design or architecture but struggling financially. When the first student wrote me a thank you letter, I cried. It felt like his kindness was alive again through me. Lily finished her degree last year. She came home for the summer, taller, wiser, and curious about everything. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset. She reached for my hand and said, "Mom, I'm proud of you." Her words filled me with quiet joy. She knew the truth now, everything that had happened with her father and Mia. I had told her when she was ready to hear it. She listened without anger, only sadness. "I don't hate him," she said. "I just don't understand how people lose themselves for money." I nodded. "Neither do I. Maybe they start small, just one lie and then another, until one day they can't see the person they were before." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You didn't lose yourself." That sentence stayed with me. Maybe that was the real victory. Last winter, I received a letter from the court. The fraud case was officially closed. Mia had been disbarred for document tampering in another case. Daniel's financial records were under review, and he was ordered to repay part of what he had taken from several clients, including me. The amount wasn't large compared to what I'd lost. But when I received the first repayment check, I smiled. I didn't even cash it. I placed it in a drawer, as a reminder that the truth always finds its way, even when you stop chasing it. That day, I drove to the cemetery to visit my grandfather's grave. It was a cold, gray morning. I cleaned the leaves from his stone and placed a small bunch of white flowers there. "Grandpa," I whispered, "I found your account. You saved me." The wind was soft, and for a moment it felt like he was right beside me, silent but proud. As I stood there, I thought about everything. The betrayal, the fear, the endless paperwork, the sleepless nights. All of it had brought me here, standing strong, still breathing, still building. I realized that what I had found wasn't just money. It was faith, in myself, in honesty, in patience. A few weeks later, Daniel called again. This time I didn't ignore it. He asked if we could talk for a few minutes. I agreed to meet him in a small cafe near the park. He looked older, quieter, almost humble. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for not destroying me when you could have." I stirred my tea slowly. "I didn't need to destroy you, Daniel. Life teaches its own lessons." He nodded, eyes down. "You were always the stronger one." I didn't correct him. I just said, "Take care of yourself. I hope you find peace." And I meant it. When I left the cafe, I didn't look back. There was no need.
That's out.